Step back. You're not on the emergency list. The words didn't match the moment, and that was the first thing that felt wrong, because behind her a man sat slumped in a wheelchair, breathing shallow, a nurse calling for assistance somewhere down the hall, monitors beeping in uneven rhythm, and yet all the attention in that emergency room had narrowed to one woman standing still like she wasn't part of the urgency unfolding around her. Amora Collins didn't move. She stood just past the sliding glass doors, hands relaxed at her sides, dressed in a charcoal hoodie, dark jeans, and low-profile sneakers, the kind of outfit that made people assume things before asking questions. A security guard shifted closer, not aggressive, not yet, just present enough to suggest a boundary had already been drawn. "Family waits outside," the receptionist added, her voice flatter this time, like she'd said it 100 times before and expected it to land the same way. Amora's eyes moved once, briefly, toward the digital clock mounted above the triage desk. 7:14 p.m. Then back to the receptionist. Calm. Measured. "Is that your protocol?" she asked quietly, "or your assumption?" The question didn't echo, but it lingered, just long enough for a nursing student leaning against the far wall to look up from her tablet, just long enough for a man holding a coffee to pause mid-sip, sensing something beneath the surface that didn't quite fit. The receptionist frowned, not expecting resistance, especially not this kind, the quiet kind that didn't escalate but didn't retreat either. "I've already explained it," she said, a little sharper now. "You need to wait outside until you're called." Another beep cut through the air. A voice from inside, "We need another set of vitals in Bay 3. Time was moving. The room knew it. Everyone felt it. And still, the line held right in front of Amora. She didn't argue. Didn't raise her voice. Didn't step back. She just watched, absorbing every detail the way someone does when they are not reacting, but recording. The guard cleared his throat softly. He began, but didn't finish. Because something in her stillness made the next step feel heavier than it should have. "Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here." Now, back to Amora Collins. She glanced once more at the clock. 7:15 p.m. 1 minute gone. The same minute someone behind her didn't have. And for a brief second, something flickered in her eyes, not anger, not frustration, something older, something that had been here before, in rooms just like this, with the same tone, the same gatekeeping dressed up as procedure. The receptionist tapped her keyboard, dismissing her with a look that said decision made. But Amora didn't leave. She shifted her weight slightly, not forward, not back, just enough to signal she wasn't going anywhere. And in that quiet refusal, the room began to change, not loudly, not all at once, but in the way people start paying attention when they realize the story they're watching isn't going to end the way they expected. The guard did not touch her, but he did step closer, just enough for the space around Amora Collins to tighten like a line being drawn in real time, and that was when the second layer of the moment revealed itself, because this was no longer about where she stood, it was about who they believed she was allowed to be in that space. The receptionist exhaled sharply and glanced at the screen in front of her as if it could validate the decision she had already made. "If you are not the patient, you cannot stand here," she said, her tone now edged with impatience, the kind that comes when authority is questioned in public. Amora's gaze shifted past her, deeper into the emergency room where movement never stopped, where a nurse crossed quickly with a chart, where a voice called out for assistance again, where time was clearly not waiting for anyone, and yet here, right at the threshold, it had been made to stop. "I am exactly where I need to be," Amora replied, her voice steady, not loud, but impossible to ignore once heard. The nursing student by the wall straightened slightly, her eyes moving between Amora and the receptionist, sensing the disconnect between urgency and enforcement. A man sitting nearby leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, watching more closely now, his earlier distraction gone. The receptionist shook her head, already reaching for the phone on her desk. "Security," she said, pressing the line, even though the guard was already there, as if escalation itself was part of the script she had followed before. The guard shifted again, this time more deliberate. "I am going to have to ask you to step back," he said, his voice controlled, careful, but carrying the weight of expectation. Amora did not respond immediately. Instead, she looked at the clock again. 7:16 p.m. Another minute gone. The beeping from inside grew more insistent, not louder, but closer, like something was moving toward a point that could not be reversed. For a brief second, her expression changed, not outwardly, but enough that if someone had been watching closely, they would have seen it, a flicker of memory crossing her face, something rooted deeper than this room, older than this moment. She took a slow breath, then spoke again, softer this time, almost reflective. "You are delaying care," she said, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact. The receptionist stiffened. "Do not twist this," she snapped. "We follow procedure." Amora's eyes returned to her, calm, unwavering. "Procedure does not pause urgency," she said. The words landed differently this time. The nursing student swallowed, her grip tightening slightly on her tablet. The man with the coffee set it down completely now, attention fully locked in. Even the guard hesitated for a fraction of a second, caught between instruction and instinct. Then the receptionist stood up from her chair, the movement abrupt, decisive. "That is enough," she said, her voice raised just enough to draw more eyes. "You either step outside, or you will be removed from this area." The sentence hung in the air, heavier than before, because now it carried consequence, and for most people, that would have been the moment to comply, to step back, to disappear into the waiting area and let the system continue uninterrupted. But Amora Collins did not move. She simply reached into her pocket, pulled out her phone, and held it in her hand without unlocking it, without dialing, just holding it there like the next step had already been decided long before she walked through those doors, and somewhere in the room, without anyone saying it out loud, the sense began to settle that whatever was about to happen next was not going to follow the pattern they expected. The phone did not light up in her hand, not yet, and that was what made it unsettling because most people reached for their phones to call for help, to react, to respond, but Amora Collins held hers like it was already part of a sequence that had nothing to do with panic and everything to do with timing. The receptionist crossed her arms, posture tightening as if she needed to reinforce the authority she felt slipping. "Last warning," she said, slower now, each word spaced out like it would carry more weight that way. "Step outside." The guard shifted his stance again, feet planted wider, preparing for compliance that had not come. Around them, the room had changed in a way that was subtle but undeniable. Conversations had quieted, movement slowed at the edges, eyes lingering longer than before. The nursing student took a small step forward without realizing it, drawn in by something she could not name yet. The man in the chair leaned back, folding his arms, no longer a bystander but not yet a participant, caught in that space where people wait to see how far something will go. From inside the emergency room, a voice called out again, sharper this time, "We need clearance in Bay 3 now." The urgency cut through everything, slicing straight past protocol, past posture, past whatever invisible line had been drawn at the entrance. Amora heard it. Everyone did. And still, the line held. She looked down at her phone, finally unlocking it with a single motion, her thumb steady, precise, not rushed. The screen reflected faintly in her eyes, a brief glow that disappeared as quickly as it came. She did not scroll. She did not hesitate. She selected a contact and lifted the phone to her ear. The receptionist let out a short, dismissive breath. "Calling someone is not going to change policy," she said, almost under her breath, but loud enough for those nearby to hear. Amora did not look at her. She listened. One ring. That was all it took. "This is Collins," she said, her voice even, controlled, carrying just enough to reach the space around her without turning into a performance. The guard's posture shifted again, not backward, not forward, just uncertain now. The nursing student blinked, the name catching somewhere in her memory like a piece that almost fit but not fully yet. "I need you to log an active delay at ER intake," Amora continued, each word clear. "Deliberate, leaving no room for interpretation. Timestamp it at 7:16 p.m. and pull all staff identifications assigned to front desk and entry control." The receptionist's expression flickered, just for a second, confusion breaking through irritation. "What is she talking about?" she muttered, but the question did not carry the confidence it had a moment ago. Amora paused, listening again, then added, "Flag it under immediate review. No internal filters." The word sounded technical, precise, like they belonged somewhere above this room, somewhere beyond the reach of the desk, the badge, the small authority being enforced at the threshold. The guard glanced toward the receptionist, waiting for direction that did not come. The nursing student's eyes widened slightly, her mind racing through names, through lectures, through orientation sessions where certain figures had been mentioned with a tone that made people listen more closely. Collins. The name settled differently now. Amora lowered the phone slightly, but did not end the call. Her gaze returned to the receptionist, calm as ever, but something had shifted beneath it, something no longer passive, no longer observing, but activating. "You said this was procedure," she said quietly. "Now we will see if it holds." And for the first time since she walked through those doors, the certainty on the other side of the desk began to crack, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough for everyone in the room to feel that whatever system had been used to keep her out was now being turned inward, examined from a level they could not see, and could not control. The silence that followed did not feel empty, it felt loaded, like something invisible had just been set in motion and no one in the room could see where it would land, only that it would, and soon. The receptionist straightened her posture again, but this time the movement lacked the certainty it carried before, like she was trying to return to a version of control that no longer fully belonged to her. "You cannot just make calls and override procedures," she said, her voice sharper than necessary, reaching for authority she could still name out loud. Amora Collins did not interrupt her. She simply listened, the phone still in her hand, the call still active, her presence unchanged, but no longer passive. "This is a hospital," the receptionist continued, glancing briefly at the guard as if to anchor herself. "There are rules for a reason." Amora nodded once, a small acknowledgement that did not concede anything. "There are," she said. "That is exactly why this matters." The words landed differently now, not confrontational, not defensive, but precise, like they were placed instead of thrown. The nursing student took another step forward, unable to stay back any longer, her voice hesitant but present. "Excuse me," she said, looking between them, "what did you mean by logging a delay?" The question hung there, fragile but important, because it broke the pattern of silent observation and turned it into participation. Amora turned her head slightly toward her, just enough to meet her eyes. "Every second someone waits when they should not," she said calmly, "it gets recorded. Or at least, it should." The student swallowed, processing, her gaze flicking toward the entrance, toward the patient behind Amora, toward the clock now reading 7:17 p.m. Another minute gone. The guard shifted again, this time less certain, his hands no longer positioned as firmly as before. He said, softer now, "If there is a misunderstanding, we can resolve it without escalating this." Amora looked at him, not unkindly, but with a clarity that made the statement feel incomplete. "This is not escalation," she replied. "This is documentation." The receptionist let out a short, incredulous laugh, but it did not carry the same confidence as before. "Documentation of what?" she said, her tone wavering just enough to be noticed. Amora's gaze returned to her. "Of what is happening right now," she said. "Exactly as it is." From inside the emergency room, footsteps approached faster this time, a nurse appearing briefly in the doorway, scanning the entrance with urgency before disappearing again, the movement quick but telling, like time inside was no longer aligning with whatever barrier was being held outside. The man in the chair stood up slowly, no longer willing to stay seated, his attention fully locked on the unfolding moment. The room was no longer neutral. It had shifted into something else, something aware. The receptionist looked down at her screen again, typing quickly, as if inputting something would restore order, but her fingers hesitated, pausing mid-motion. The system she relied on did not seem to offer the reassurance it once did. Amora's phone buzzed lightly in her hand, a response coming through. She glanced at it briefly, reading without reacting, then lifted her eyes again. "It is active," she said quietly, more to the moment than to anyone specific. The words did not need explanation. They carried their own weight. The nursing student's eyes widened slightly, the realization beginning to settle, not fully formed, but close enough to feel. Collins. The name echoed again, louder this time in her thoughts. The receptionist noticed the shift, the way attention was no longer aligned with her, and something in her expression tightened. "You are creating a scene," she said, but even as she said it, it sounded less like an accusation and more like a loss of control. Amora did not raise her voice. "No," she said. "I am revealing one." And in that moment, the balance in the room tipped just enough that everyone could feel it, the difference between enforcing a rule and being seen while doing it, and for the first time, the people on the other side of the desk were no longer certain which side of that line they were standing on. The shift did not announce itself, it settled into the room quietly, like a pressure change that everyone felt but no one could immediately explain, and it was in that subtle tension that the next layer began to unfold. The receptionist's fingers hovered above the keyboard, no longer typing, no longer certain what input would fix what was now happening in front of her. "You are overstepping," she said, but the words came out thinner than before, like they had lost their anchor. Amora Collins did not respond right away. Instead, she turned slightly, just enough to look past the entrance again, her attention pulled toward the patient behind her, the man now being steadied by a nurse who had finally stepped forward, her movements quick but cautious, as if navigating not just urgency but uncertainty. "We need space," the nurse called out, her voice cutting through the tension, but this time it was not directed at Amora, it was directed at the barrier itself, at the delay that had already cost more time than anyone wanted to admit. The guard stepped aside instinctively, not fully, but enough to break the line that had been held so firmly just moments ago. That was all it took. The nursing student moved closer, her voice low but urgent. "She is right," she said, almost to herself, but loud enough for the receptionist to hear. "If there is a delay, it has to be logged." The receptionist turned toward her sharply. "You are not part of this," she snapped, grasping for structure, for hierarchy, for something that would restore the order she understood. But the student did not step back this time. She hesitated, yes, but she stayed. "We were taught that every intake time matters," she said, her voice steadier now, the memory of training rising to the surface. "Every minute." The words echoed differently than the ones before, because they did not challenge authority, they referenced it. They pointed to a system that was supposed to exist beyond individual judgment. Amora watched the exchange without interruption, her presence still calm, still grounded, but now clearly at the center of something larger than a single interaction. Her phone vibrated again, longer this time. She lifted it, glanced at the screen, and for the first time, there was the faintest shift in her expression, not surprise, not satisfaction, but confirmation. "They have access now," she said quietly. The receptionist blinked. "Who has access?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. Amora met her gaze directly. "Oversight," she said. One word. No explanation. It did not need one. The man who had been standing nearby took a slow step back, giving space not out of instruction, but instinct, like the ground beneath the situation had changed in a way he could not see but could feel. The nurse inside the ER moved more decisively now, guiding the patient through the entrance without looking toward the desk again, as if whatever barrier had existed there no longer applied in the same way. The receptionist turned back to her screen, typing again, faster now, but her movements were reactive, not controlled, as if she was trying to catch up to something already in motion. "This is not how this works," she said, but the statement sounded more like a hope than a fact. Amora tilted her head slightly. "It is exactly how it works," she replied. "You just do not usually see it happen in real time." The guard looked between them, his posture no longer firm, his role unclear in a situation that had moved beyond simple enforcement. The nursing student exhaled slowly, her eyes fixed on Amora now, the recognition settling deeper, not fully spoken, but undeniable in the way she watched her. Collins. The name was no longer just familiar. It was significant. The clock ticked forward again. 7:18 p.m. And in that minute, the room crossed a threshold it could not return from, where procedure was no longer just being followed, it was being examined, and everyone standing there could feel that whatever came next would not be decided at the desk, or by the guard, or by anyone in that immediate space, but by something already activated beyond it, something that had been waiting for a moment exactly like this. The room no longer belonged to the front desk, and everyone felt it even if no one said it out loud, because authority had shifted somewhere unseen, somewhere above the level of badges and scripts and practiced responses. The receptionist stared at her screen, her eye scanning rapidly as if something new might appear to restore certainty, but the longer she looked, the more her expression tightened. "This system is not showing anything," she said, almost defensively, as if the absence of information could cancel what had already been set in motion. Amora Collins did not move closer, did not press forward, she simply stood where she had been from the beginning, steady, composed, her presence now carrying a different weight, not because she had raised her voice, but because she had not needed to. "It will," she said quietly. "It just takes a moment to reach your level." The words were not sharp, but they landed with precision, and for the first time, the receptionist did not immediately respond. The guard shifted again, this time stepping slightly back, not in retreat, but in recognition that whatever was unfolding was no longer his to control. From the hallway behind the desk, a door opened with a soft but distinct sound, and a new figure stepped into view, a charge nurse, older, composed, her posture carrying authority that did not rely on volume. She looked from the receptionist to Amora, then to the nursing student, reading the room in a single glance. "What is going on here?" she asked, her tone even, but firm enough to quiet the remaining murmurs. The receptionist straightened quickly. "She is refusing to follow intake protocol," she said, the explanation coming fast, rehearsed, but lacking the certainty it would have held minutes ago. The charge nurse's gaze shifted to Amora. She said, measured, professional, "If there is an issue, we can resolve it, but we cannot have disruptions at the entrance." Amora met her eyes, calm, unwavering. "The disruption already happened," she said. "I am just making sure it is not ignored." The charge nurse paused, the words settling in a way that forced consideration rather than dismissal. "What disruption?" she asked. Amora did not look toward the patient this time. She looked at the clock. 7:19 p.m. Another minute accounted for. "Delayed intake at the point of entry," she said. 3 minutes and counting. The nursing student inhaled sharply, the precision of the statement confirming what she had begun to suspect. The charge nurse's expression shifted slightly, not fully, but enough to show that the language had reached a level she recognized. "Who are you?" she asked, not as a challenge, but as a necessity. The receptionist glanced between them, tension rising again, but this time it was different, less about control, more about uncertainty. Amora held the silence for a second, not prolonging it, just letting it exist long enough for the weight of the question to settle. Then her phone vibrated again, stronger this time, a notification that did not need to be read aloud to be understood. She glanced at it briefly, then lifted her gaze back to the charge nurse. "You are about to receive an internal alert," she said. The charge nurse frowned slightly, instinctively reaching for the device clipped at her side. The receptionist let out a small, disbelieving breath. "That is not possible," she said, but the words felt weaker than before. And then it happened. A sharp tone cut through the air, not from the patient monitors, not from the hallway, but from the charge nurse's device. She looked down, her thumb moving quickly, her eye scanning the screen as the color drained subtly from her face. The room held still, every movement suspended in that moment of realization. The guard stopped shifting. The nursing student leaned forward just enough to see. The man near the chairs did not move at all. The charge nurse looked up slowly, her gaze returning to Amora, but now it carried something different, recognition not of identity yet, but of consequence. "This says," she began, her voice quieter now, "active internal review initiated at ER intake." The words landed like a shifting gravity. The receptionist froze, her hands hovering uselessly above the keyboard. Amora did not react outwardly. She did not need to. "Yes," she said softly. "It does." And in that instant, the room understood something had crossed a line that could not be undone, that what started as a simple instruction at a front desk had now reached a level where every action, every word, every second was no longer just happening, it was being recorded, examined, and judged in real time by a system far beyond the people standing there, and for the first time since it began. The question was no longer whether she belonged in that space, but whether anyone else in that moment had acted like they deserved to. The words did not echo, but they settled into every corner of the room with a weight that could not be ignored, and for a moment no one moved because the shift had become undeniable, not just felt but confirmed. The charge nurse lowered her device slowly, her eyes still on Amora Collins, recalculating everything that had happened in the last 5 minutes, every instruction given, every second that had passed at that entrance. The receptionist took a step back from the desk, almost without realizing it, her posture no longer firm but uncertain, like the ground beneath her authority had quietly disappeared. "That does not make sense," she said, her voice softer now, no longer sharp, no longer leading, just trying to catch up. "We did everything by the book." Amora tilted her head slightly, her expression unchanged. "Then the book will support you," she replied, calm, precise, leaving no room for argument, only for outcome. The nursing student's breathing slowed, but her focus sharpened, her eyes moving between the charge nurse and Amora, the realization now fully forming. She had heard that name before, not in passing, but in lectures, in orientation briefings, in discussions about oversight and accountability, about people who did not show up often, but when they did, it meant something had already gone wrong. Collins. The name carried weight now. The charge nurse straightened, her posture shifting from reaction to control, but this time it was different, not defensive, but corrective. "I need a full recount of what happened here," she said, her tone steady, but no longer aligned with the receptionist. The receptionist blinked, caught off guard by the shift. She refused to step outside, she said quickly, reaching for the same explanation, but it sounded incomplete even as she said it. And before that, the charge nurse pressed, her voice firm now. The hesitation that followed was small, but visible. She stood at the entrance, the receptionist said, slower this time. "We asked her to wait." The charge nurse's eyes narrowed slightly. "How long?" she asked. The receptionist glanced at the clock instinctively. 7:20 p.m. The answer sat there, unspoken, measurable. The nursing student spoke before she could stop herself. "About 4 minutes," she said, her voice careful but clear. The receptionist turned toward her, frustration rising again, but it did not land the same way. The charge nurse did not look at the student with disapproval. She nodded once, absorbing it. For minutes at intake, she repeated quietly, as if stating it made it real in a way it could not be undone. Amora watched the exchange without interruption, her presence steady, her role now fully shifted from participant to witness. Her phone buzzed again, another update, another layer of confirmation, but she did not look at it this time. She did not need to. The system was already moving. The guard stood still now, no longer repositioning, his role reduced to observation in a situation that had moved beyond enforcement. The man near the chairs shook his head slightly, not in disbelief, but in recognition, like he had seen something like this before, just not this clearly. The charge nurse exhaled slowly, then looked directly at Amora. "You initiated this," she said, not accusing, just stating fact. Amora met her gaze. "No," she said. "I documented it." The distinction hung there, sharp and undeniable. The receptionist's hands dropped to her sides, her earlier confidence gone, replaced by something quieter, something closer to realization. "We were trying to manage flow," she said, her voice lower now, almost defensive in a different way. Amora nodded once. "And in doing that," she said, "you decided who waits." The charge nurse closed her eyes for a brief second, not in frustration, but in acknowledgement, the kind that comes when a line has been crossed and cannot be explained away. When she opened them again, her focus had changed. "From this point forward," she said, her voice firm and clear, "every action is under review." The words were not loud, but they carried authority that no one questioned. The receptionist did not respond. The nursing student did not move. The guard did not speak. Amora Collins stood exactly where she had been from the beginning, calm, composed, no longer being questioned, no longer being managed, but now standing as the center of a moment that had shifted from routine to reckoning, where the system was no longer invisible, and everyone present was now part of the record it had created. For a brief moment, the room exhaled, not in relief, but in recognition, because something irreversible had just settled into place, and even though no one had raised their voice, no one had argued loudly, the weight of what had happened pressed into the silence like a truth no one could step around. Amora Collins did not speak. She did not move. But her stillness now carried something deeper, something rooted far beyond the past 5 minutes, something older than this hospital, older than this desk, older than this exact moment repeating itself in different forms across years she had already lived through. Her eyes drifted, not toward the people in front of her, not toward the charge nurse or the receptionist, but somewhere slightly past them, as if the present had opened a door to something behind it. 17 years old. A waiting room that smelled the same, sharp and clean but heavy with something unspoken. Her mother sitting beside her, quiet, composed, holding a folded insurance card that should have meant access, should have meant care, should have meant something more than a delay. "We just need to verify a few things," someone had said back then, the tone polite, controlled, practiced in a way that made it harder to challenge. Minutes passed. Then more. The clock had moved just like this one. Slow. Precise. Unforgiving. She remembered watching her mother's posture change, not dramatically, not suddenly, just a slight shift in the way she held herself, like the room had already decided something about her before she had the chance to respond. "Can we please just get someone to look at her?" Amora had asked back then, her voice smaller, younger, but already carrying the same question she would ask in different forms for years to come. The answer had been the same kind of answer. Calm. Dismissive. Final without saying it directly. Wait. Just wait. The memory did not come with noise. It came with stillness. With the image of a chair that felt too hard, a clock that felt too loud, and a system that felt too distant to reach. Back in the present, the clock read 7:21 p.m. Another minute marked. Another moment accounted for. The charge nurse was speaking again, giving instructions, her voice controlled, corrective, already moving into the process that followed a triggered review. The receptionist stood quieter now, her earlier certainty replaced by something that did not have a name yet, something between defensiveness and realization. The nursing student had not moved, her eyes fixed on Amora, not with curiosity anymore, but with understanding, as if she could feel the weight of what this moment represented beyond the surface. Amora blinked once, slowly, the memory settling back into place, not gone, but stored, like it always had been, like it always would be. She had not raised her voice then. She had not been heard then. But she had remembered. Every detail. Every delay. Every quiet decision made in a room that believed no one was watching closely enough to question it. Her hand tightened slightly around her phone, not out of tension, but out of control, a grounding point between past and present. The system that had once felt unreachable now moved because she had built a way to reach it. Not for this moment alone, but for every moment that looked like it. She lifted her gaze again, returning fully to the room, to the people standing in front of her, to the system now actively unfolding around them. "This is not new," she said quietly, not to accuse, not to explain, just to state something that existed long before this interaction. The charge nurse paused briefly, the words catching her attention. The receptionist looked up, uncertain how to respond. The nursing student listened, completely still. Amora's voice remained calm, steady, carrying the weight of something lived, not imagined. "It just has not been seen like this before." And in that moment, the room understood that what they were witnessing was not just a single incident being reviewed, but a pattern being exposed, one that had existed quietly, repeatedly, until someone who had lived through it chose not to react, not to argue, but to document it in a way that could no longer be ignored. The words did not fade when she finished speaking, they lingered, pressing into the silence like something that had finally been given permission to exist out loud, and for a moment no one responded because there was no immediate defense for something that had been described so plainly. The charge nurse shifted her stance, her posture no longer just corrective but reflective, as if she was now looking at the system she worked within from a different angle, one she had not been forced to confront in real time before. The receptionist looked down again, but this time not at the screen, not at the system, but at the counter itself, her hands resting against it without purpose, as if the structure she relied on had stopped giving her direction. The nursing student took a slow breath, her voice quieter now, but stronger in a different way. "If it is not new," she said carefully, "then how many times has it happened?" The question did not accuse. It revealed. And in that moment, the room felt smaller, not physically, but in the way truth narrows space until there is no distance left to hide behind. Amora Collins turned her gaze toward her, steady, direct. "Enough times," she said, "that it became normal." The charge nurse closed her eyes briefly, the answer landing deeper than she expected, because it was not about one delay, or one decision, it was about repetition, about patterns that no longer looked like problems because they had been seen too often without consequence. Her device buzzed again, a second alert layered over the first, more detailed, more specific. She looked down quickly, scanning, her expression tightening as new information appeared. "They are pulling entry logs," she said, almost to herself, but loud enough for the others to hear. "Timestamps, staff assignments, response intervals." The receptionist looked up sharply. "That is not necessary," she said, instinctively, her voice rising slightly as she reached for control that was no longer hers to hold. "We already explained what happened." The charge nurse did not look at her. "It is not about what we say happened," she replied. "It is about what the system shows happened." The distinction was immediate and final. The guard shifted his weight again, but this time it was not uncertainty, it was discomfort, the realization that presence alone could no longer influence the outcome. The man near the chairs crossed his arms again, watching, but now with a different expression, one that suggested he understood the significance of what was unfolding beyond the surface. Amora's phone vibrated once more, a steady pulse against her palm, and this time she lifted it, not to call, not to initiate, but to confirm. She read the message silently, then lowered it, her gaze returning to the charge nurse. "They are expanding the review," she said calmly. "Not just this moment." The receptionist's breath caught slightly. "What does that mean?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could frame it differently. Amora held her gaze, not unkindly, but without softness. "It means this is not isolated," she said. "And it is about to be measured." The words landed with a clarity that left no space for misinterpretation. The nursing student's eyes widened again, the scale of what was happening beginning to take shape in her mind, not just a correction, not just a reprimand, but something broader, something that would look backward as much as it looked at the present. The charge nurse straightened again, her focus sharpening, her role now fully shifted into accountability. "From this point forward," she said, her voice firm, "all intake interactions are subject to review until further notice." The receptionist did not respond. She could not. The structure she had relied on had moved beyond her reach, and in its place stood a process she could not control. Amora remained still, composed, her presence unchanged on the surface, but everything around her had shifted, not because she forced it, not because she demanded it, but because she revealed it. She looked once more at the clock. 7:22 p.m. Another minute marked. Another piece of the record secured. Then she spoke, her voice low, but carrying through the room with quiet certainty. "You do not fix patterns by explaining them," she said. "You fix them by exposing them." And in that moment, the room understood that what had begun as a single decision at a front desk had now become something far larger, something that would not end when the shift changed, or when the room cleared, but something that would follow the system itself, forcing it to answer for what it had allowed to become normal for far too long. The room had stopped pretending this was routine, and that realization settled into every movement, every glance, every silence that followed, because once something is seen clearly, it cannot return to being invisible again. The charge nurse stood straighter now, no longer reacting, no longer adjusting, but operating with a clarity that came from knowing the situation had moved beyond internal handling. Her device remained in her hand, the screen still active, still updating, still feeding information from a level above them all. "They are requesting full compliance logs," she said, her voice controlled but unmistakably firm. "Not just intake. Entire shift activity." The receptionist's head lifted slowly, her eyes searching for something to hold onto. "That is excessive," she said, but the word lacked force, like it had already been rejected before it was spoken. Amora Collins did not respond immediately. She allowed the statement to exist, to settle, to reveal itself for what it was. Then she spoke, her voice calm, unwavering. "It feels excessive when it has never been done before," she said. "But it is standard when accountability is real." The distinction landed clean, leaving no room for interpretation. The nursing student shifted slightly, her posture no longer hesitant, but attentive, absorbing every word as if this moment was becoming a lesson far more important than anything she had studied in a classroom. The guard remained still, his presence now symbolic rather than functional, a reminder of how quickly authority could shift when the foundation beneath it changed. The man near the chairs nodded faintly, almost to himself, recognizing the pattern being named out loud in a way he had likely seen but never heard articulated this clearly. The charge nurse took a step forward, her focus locked now, her role no longer about maintaining order but restoring integrity. "From this point on," she said, addressing the receptionist directly, "you will answer every question with exact timing. No assumptions. No summaries. Just facts." The receptionist swallowed, her earlier confidence gone completely now, replaced by the weight of being observed not just by the room, but by something far beyond it. I followed the process," she said, her voice quieter, searching for stability. Amora met her gaze, steady, direct. "You followed what you believed the process allowed," she said. "That is different." The words did not accuse. They clarified. And in that clarity, the line between intention and impact became impossible to ignore. The device in the charge. Nurse's hand buzzed again, sharper this time, and she looked down immediately, her eyes scanning faster, her expression tightening as another layer of instruction appeared. "They are requesting identification confirmation," she said slowly. "For everyone present at intake." The room shifted again, not physically, but in awareness, because this was no longer about a single decision, it was about every person who had been part of it, every role, every action, every second. The receptionist's breath caught slightly. "Everyone," she repeated, the word sounding heavier now. The nursing student straightened, her shoulders squaring instinctively, not out of fear, but out of recognition that she too was now part of the record. The guard adjusted his stance again, but this time it was subtle, controlled, as if preparing to be accounted for rather than to enforce anything further. Amora remained exactly where she had been, her presence unchanged, her role now fully understood by the room even if not yet fully spoken aloud. She glanced once more at the clock. 7:23 p.m. Another minute documented. Another layer added. Then she spoke again, her voice low, but carrying with quiet certainty. "This is where it changes," she said. The charge nurse looked up from her device, meeting her eyes. The receptionist did the same, her expression no longer defensive, but uncertain, waiting. Amora's gaze moved between them, not hurried, not dramatic, just precise. "Because now," she continued, "it is no longer about whether I belonged here." She paused just long enough for the weight of that statement to settle. "It is about whether your system treated me the way it claims it treats everyone." The silence that followed was complete, not empty, but full, because every person in that room understood exactly what that question meant, and more importantly, that it was no longer being asked in a space where it could be ignored, but in one where it had already begun to be answered. The silence did not break immediately after her words, it deepened, stretching across the room in a way that made every second feel heavier than the last, because now the question was no longer abstract, it was active, unfolding in real time with no way to step around it. The charge nurse held Amora Collins's gaze for a moment longer, then looked back down at her device as it vibrated again, this time with a sequence of alerts arriving faster than before, layered, precise, undeniable. "They have initiated a full intake audit," she said, her voice steady but lower now, as if acknowledging the weight of what that meant. All interactions are being reviewed against compliance standards. The receptionist's shoulders dropped slightly, the last traces of her earlier certainty fading into something quieter, something closer to realization. "We were just doing our job," she said, not defensively now, but almost searching for understanding, as if the statement itself could still offer protection. Amora did not interrupt her. She let the words sit, allowed them to exist without immediate correction, then answered with the same calm precision that had carried her through every moment so far. "Your job is not just to follow steps," she said. "It is to understand what those steps are meant to protect." The distinction landed clearly, leaving no space to retreat into routine. The nursing student nodded slightly, almost unconsciously, the statement aligning with something she had been taught but had never seen tested this directly. The guard remained still, his presence now entirely observational, his role reduced to witnessing a process that had moved beyond anything he could influence. The man near the chairs exhaled slowly, his attention fixed on Amora, not with curiosity anymore, but with recognition, as if he understood that what he was seeing was not just an incident, but a correction long overdue. The charge nurse took a breath, then spoke again, her tone firm, decisive. "We are going to reconstruct the timeline," she said. "Second by second if necessary." She looked directly at the receptionist. "You will start from the moment she approached the desk." The receptionist hesitated, her eyes flicking briefly toward Amora before returning to the charge nurse. She walked in, she began slowly, her voice measured now, stripped of assumption. She stood at the entrance. "I asked if she was the patient." She did not answer directly. The nursing student shifted slightly. "She asked if it was protocol or assumption," she added quietly, correcting the record, not out of defiance, but accuracy. The charge nurse nodded once, accepting it. "Continue," she said. The receptionist swallowed. "I told her family waits outside," she said. "I asked her to step back." Her voice softened further with each word, the realization growing clearer as the timeline took shape. "And she did not move," the guard added, his voice controlled, contributing now not as enforcement, but as part of the record. The charge nurse's device buzzed again, and she glanced down briefly. "Time gap confirmed," she said. 3 minutes and 48 seconds between initial contact and patient clearance. The number hung in the air, precise, undeniable, no longer an estimate, no longer a feeling, but a fact. Amora looked at the clock again. 7:24 p.m. Another minute marked, but this one different, because now the system itself had begun to speak. She turned her gaze back to the charge nurse, her expression calm, unchanged, but her words carried the weight of everything that had been revealed. "You do not need me to explain what happened," she said. "You have the data." The charge nurse met her eyes, and for the first time, there was no question left in her expression, only acknowledgement. The receptionist lowered her head slightly, the shift complete, the understanding no longer avoidable. The nursing student stood still, absorbing every detail, knowing this moment would stay with her far beyond this room. And Amora Collins remained exactly where she had been from the beginning, not elevated, not loud, not forceful, but undeniable, because she had not demanded to be believed, she had made it impossible not to see. The number did not fade after it was spoken, it settled into the room like a line drawn in permanent ink, 3 minutes and 48 seconds, not long enough to feel dramatic in isolation, but long enough to matter when measured against urgency, long enough to become evidence instead of assumption. The charge nurse lowered her device slightly, her posture now fully aligned with the reality in front of her, not the routine she had walked into moments earlier. "We are escalating this to administrative review immediately," she said, her voice firm, no hesitation left, no uncertainty to soften the decision. The receptionist did not argue. She did not reach for another explanation. She simply nodded once, slowly, as if the weight of what had been confirmed had finally settled into place. The guard shifted his stance again, but this time it was subtle, respectful, as if acknowledging a boundary he had not seen before but now understood clearly. The nursing student remained still, her eyes moving between each person in the room, absorbing not just what was happening, but how it was happening, the difference between authority enforced and accountability revealed. Amora Collins stood exactly where she had been, her presence unchanged, her posture steady, her voice no louder than it had been at the beginning, but everything around her had shifted because she had not reacted, she had recorded, she had not argued, she had clarified. The charge nurse's device buzzed again, and she looked down quickly, scanning the latest update. Temporary access restrictions are being applied, she said. Front desk intake is under supervision effective immediately. The receptionist closed her eyes briefly, then opened them, her expression no longer defensive, no longer uncertain, but reflective in a way that suggested understanding had replaced resistance. I did not think, she began, then stopped, the sentence unfinished because the thought itself no longer mattered in the presence of what had been confirmed. Amora looked at her, not with judgment, not with anger, but with a calm clarity that carried more weight than either. That is the problem, she said quietly. You did not think you had to. The words were not harsh, but they landed with precision, defining the moment in a way no policy ever could. The man near the chairs nodded slowly, his expression steady, as if the statement had named something he had recognized long before but had never heard said so directly. The nursing student lowered her gaze briefly, then lifted it again, her posture straighter now, her understanding deeper, the lesson no longer theoretical, but lived in front of her. The charge nurse took a step back, her role now clearly defined within a process that had moved beyond her control, but not beyond her responsibility. This will be documented in full, she said, her voice steady. Every detail. Amora nodded once, a small acknowledgement, not of authority, but of alignment with what should have been in place from the beginning. She glanced once more at the clock. 7:25 p.m. Another minute marked, but this one different, because now the system was not just responding, it was correcting. She returned her gaze to the room, to the people who had been part of the moment from the start, her expression calm, composed, but her presence unmistakable. You do not correct a system by waiting for it to fail loudly, she said, her voice low but clear. You correct it by paying attention when it fails quietly. The word settled into the room with a finality that did not need reinforcement, because everyone there understood that what had just happened would not end when the shift ended, or when the room emptied, but would move forward into something larger, something lasting, something that would not allow the same pattern to continue without being seen, measured, and answered for. By the time the next minute turned, the room no longer felt like a waiting area, it felt like a line had been crossed and recorded, one that would not be erased by time or routine, because once a system is forced to see itself clearly, it cannot return to what it pretended to be before. The charge nurse stepped aside slightly, already speaking into her device, her voice low but precise as she relayed confirmation codes, escalation levels, and identifiers that would carry this moment beyond the walls of the emergency room. The receptionist remained still behind the desk, her hands resting flat against the surface, no longer typing, no longer reaching, just present in a way she had not been before, fully aware that what had happened was no longer something she could explain away or move past quietly. The guard stood with a different posture now, not guarding a boundary, but respecting one that had been revealed, his presence calm, his silence intentional. The nursing student took one final look at Amora Collins, not with uncertainty, but with clarity, the kind that comes when a lesson stops being theoretical and becomes something lived, something witnessed, something that would shape every decision she made moving forward. The man near the chairs picked up his coffee again, but he did not drink it, he just held it, his gaze lingering a moment longer before turning away, carrying the understanding with him as he stepped back into his own place in the room. Amora glanced at the clock one last time. 7:26 p.m. The time did not feel the same anymore. It no longer measured delay. It marked accountability. She lowered her hand slowly, slipping her phone back into her pocket, the motion quiet, controlled, like everything else she had done since she walked in. No raised voice. No argument. No demand. Just presence, precision, and the kind of authority that does not need to be announced to be understood. The charge nurse finished her call and turned back toward her, her expression steady. Respectful in a way that had not existed at the beginning. The review will continue beyond this shift, she said. You have my word. Amora nodded once, a simple acknowledgement, not seeking reassurance, not requiring it, just confirming that the process had begun and would move forward without her needing to stand there any longer. She took a step forward, not toward the desk, not toward the entrance, but through the space that had once been blocked, now open, not because she forced it, but because it had been revealed for what it was. As she passed, no one stopped her. No one questioned her. The space adjusted around her naturally, as if it had always been meant to. She paused briefly at the threshold, not turning back fully, just enough for her voice to carry without effort. "You did not stop me from entering," she said calmly. "You showed me exactly where your system breaks." The word settled into the room with a quiet finality, not as a threat, not as a warning, but as a truth that would remain long after she walked away. Then she continued forward, her steps steady, her presence unchanged, leaving behind a room that no longer operated on assumption, no longer moved without awareness, but one that had been forced, in a matter of minutes, to confront itself honestly. And as the doors closed softly behind her, the system did not reset. It adjusted. Because this time, it had been seen. And this time, it had been recorded. And this time, it would be answered for.